Well, hey guys, here we are next week, next teaching in our series, Holy Formed. And man, what a wild week it's been. We knew that was coming. We knew that God had just perfectly orchestrated that last week and this week we would just be kind of talking through the realities of being a people of peace, of shalom, and what that means in our everyday lives. And so we're going to take just a little bit more time this week to just walk through really still in that Jeremiah text of Jeremiah 29 and just talking about this idea of holy formed. Well, what is that? And what are we talking about this week? This week, what we're going to be majoring on is this idea of shalom being worked out in the way that we do our vocation, our jobs. Now you might be thinking, well, I don't work. I'm a stay-at-home mom. You might be thinking, yeah, my job is this or my job is that. And what do you mean by vocation? What do you mean by that? The idea of a vocation is not just something that we get paid to do, but it's also something that is our craft. It is our artistry. You know that one of our values around here at Emmaus is that we value this idea of artistry, and that God has gifted us all in unique ways, and He wants us to be using those things as He intended. And so this reality of vocational, even vocational holiness, remember our series, Holy Formed, we've all been given a task. We've all been given a calling. We've all been gifted in certain ways. And all of these things work together, and they form this idea of a calling, of a vocational holiness, a way that God has set us apart as His people to be working for His glory and others' good. Well, you see, sometimes, I know if you're like me, I grew up, throughout my life, and I thought work was this kind of part of the fall. We kind of go directly back to Genesis, and we think like how God cursed Adam and Eve, and He said, Eve, you're going to have pain in childbearing, and Adam, you're going to just have to labor and toil as you work the earth. And so this idea just kind of came into my life very early that work was pre-fall. Work was part of the fall. It was part of our fallen nature. It was kind of the curse, if you will. And this idea of not having to work and not having to produce and just kind of living 2 feet off the ground, eating bonbons all day, not doing anything, stuff just sprouting up, money just coming in, all of these things, that was just what the perfect creation was like. But if you really dig into Genesis 1 and 2, as God created in the days, as He worked, He set man down. He set Adam and Eve down into the garden. He said, you're going to eat of its fruit. You're going to work it. Be fruitful and multiply. The idea of work was written into the creative order. It was there in the beginning in God's perfect world. You see, work is not from sin. Work got hard. Our attention spans, our brokenness entered in, and we are the ones who broke it. So as we begin talking about this idea of vocational holiness, as we talk about this week what it means to be a people that continue to bring that shalom into our workplaces, to see what we do and what God has given us to do as holy, that's what we need to understand. That this idea that God has made you and He's made me a people, and He's given us a job. And sometimes our job doesn't feel like artistry. It doesn't feel like a craftsman. Tish Warren in the book, it's easier for us if we kind of detach ourselves and think of like this kind of puritanical, like old world, like candlestick makers, blacksmiths, like we're on the homestead, we're waking up at sunrise, we're going to bed at sunset, kind of a Laura Ingalls Wilder Little House on the Prairie existence. We are a chair maker, and we spend all our time making this one chair, and then we produce it, and someone sits in it, and we're so proud of that, and we can look at it, and we can stand back, and we can say, look at this craftsman I am, and we can kind of commune with God in that place. Well, that's really easy for all of us. But if I were to kind of switch the narrative there and to ask you about sending emails or hitting a work deadline, or maybe you work in service industry and fast food, maybe you're a doctor or a nurse, or definitely moms at home changing endless diapers or wet onesies, or maybe you're sitting in a cubicle, or maybe now because you're at home it's endless Zoom, and we can get nothing done, and there's nothing that feels artistic, there's nothing that feels like I'm a craftsman or a craftswoman, and for sure it doesn't feel like a noble, high calling or holy. But what I want us to understand is that this is exactly what God has intended. That though our world looks very different, though we live in a society post-industrial revolution, and that is the world at which we live, that is not lost on God. And this reality where you and I have to be people of shalom and peacemakers, where we have to be God's people, where we have to bring God into our workplace, that begins to change things. Even through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, if you were in the church, Christian subculture, one of the things that we've all talked about, and this is still a very real thing, but we talk about how can we bring God to the workplace, and usually our mind and thought goes, how can I work God into a conversation? How can I tell people that I go to this church or I follow Jesus, or maybe even the old school conversations of like asking them do they know where they'd go if they died on the way home from work, and we're trying to like bring God into our workplace. Or we say a prayer with our lunch, or when we take some clients out. But the reality of it is, this has never been what God intended. For sure, those are part of it. I'm not saying those things are bad, but if that's the only way that we look at it, like, well, let me invite God into this, and let me work at this for 40 years, and let me retire on time so that I can get over this just kind of crappy work situation that's kind of part of the fall, part of this kind of our lot in life, and so that I can actually get to doing something else, we completely miss it. Now, on top of that, if you just look around at our culture and see the realities of how all the retirements, the 401ks, I'm not saying those things are bad, or look at our even mindset and this reality of like, man, I just want to get off work, working for the weekend, the Monday, case of the Mondays, or the Sunday night, kind of Sunday sundown syndrome, kind of this complete just existential dread that you have on Sunday night as the week is encroaching. We all experience that. We all want to get off at 5 when the whistle blows. We'd all want to roll over and snooze 5 and 6 more times and put off today's work. This is our experience. But what we need to see is this is not the way God intended it to be. God intended for us to be a people set apart, bringing His glory and His purposes at work in the world through the way that He's made us and gifted us and placed us in His world. Remember, we're participators in His creation. We talked about that a few weeks ago. And one of the ways that He does this is by us living an embodied life, not just some spiritual orbs, not completely carnal in the flesh, but that we put these two things together, and that's where we live. You see, last week we talked about Jeremiah 29 and that call for Israel to be building homes, planting gardens, having families. They were an agrarian society. That was work to them. That was crafting. There was an artisticness to that. That's what was going on there as well, as God was saying, this is what you're going to do. You're seek the welfare of your city by crafting, by bringing me into those everyday, mundane spheres that I've built into creation. But that's not our experience. We know we live in a workaholic world where we're just productivity. What can you produce for me? What can you produce for me? Working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Or we suffer from this reality of just getting nothing done, a kind of holistic slothfulness, if you will, that just seeks to just not just be lazy. That's not actually what slothfulness is. That's teaching for another time. But this avoidance of reality, this trying to move away from just where we are in the present. As you've spent now the 8-9 months in Zoom and working from home, do you just wish you could be anywhere but in your office at your house? Are you a stay-at-home mom who's just one more day with one more unruly kid, with one more diaper to change, one more meal to fix, one more husband to fix a dinner for? Are you just tired of this and I want to be anywhere but here. Take me anywhere, let me do anything. We all long for something more and better and different. We have to watch that. It's a razor's edge. Tish Warren talks about it in the book as kind of this incessant need for productivity on one side to this complete just relegation and avoidance of all work on the other. Now, if we too much focus even on our retirements and getting to the end of our work, we can live in that same place too. And the reality of it is, we don't see retirement anywhere in God's Word. I'm going to stop there because I'll get on a soapbox. But the reality of it is, these are the two pendulums that you see most prevalent in our world, and I think you see them if we'll take a look at ourselves. In this third way, if you will, is this ability to not swing the pendulum only to productivity and find our worth in that, or completely see only a getting out from under the burden of work, or having days off, or weekends, or retirement as the pinnacle of living. We have to find somewhere in the middle that sees who we are and what we do as holy. And that's what we're talking about when we're thinking of vocational holiness. And God has made us living in the world with God's people, doing life with them. He's given us a task at hand. We can over romanticize it and think, if I could only do this, if I could only produce this, man, then I would really be living. Man, if I could only go do what I wanted to go do, I wouldn't have to do this thing over here to pay the bills. If I wasn't a trash collector, if I didn't have to wash dishes. You see, there is nothing so menial that God is not there, and we as His people need to be a people participating in His work in creation, no matter what it is. You see, God's washing dishes, and God's milking cows, and God changes tires, and God is doing the dishes at our homes, and making dinners, and changing kids. He's in the cubicle with us. He's in Hollywood. He's in Washington. That's how He does it. He's even in the pastorate. You see, it's easy to say, oh, that person over there is doing the Lord's work. I even thought that about myself at one point. I thought to myself, man, I'm never going to just be able to go work in a cubicle somewhere. I have to do something that matters. I have to do it. God, in His grace, even after I said yes to being in full-time ministry years ago, was kind to slowly change my view. But even as I prepared this teaching and was studying more and more, I was really convicted again and again and again of just the reality of how good God is to take all the things, all our things, and He says, I'm in those things. Come and meet me. You see, that's that third way. Meeting God where He is. We need to be asking the question is, how can I go meet with God in the things that He's already given me? He's given you kids. Go meet God there with your kids. He's given you a husband or wife. Go meet them there. If He's made you single, meet with God there. If He's given you a job that you hate, meet with Him there. If He's given you a job that you love, meet with Him there. If you're still in school, meet with God there. That is the place that He is present, and He wants to meet with you. And He's taking all of those things. He's taking all of our things, and He's making them beautiful. We might not see any of these things come to fruition in the way that we want to, but He's doing it. J.R.R. Tolkien, to illustrate this, what I'm saying there, during World War II, he was in the middle of writing his the trilogy, the books that would become the kind of that Lord of the Rings series. And he kind of got stuck, and he was going in so many subplots, and he'd been working so long at building all these kind of alternate universes and all the work that it took to create what he began creating. And he was kind of halfway through, and he kind of just became, I don't know, just almost bored with his work. And the reality of it is, he had a dream one night, and then he wrote this down, and it became an allegorical short story that really was about himself. And it's a story called Leaf by Neagle, and you can go look it up. It's an amazing story. But in this story, there's a guy, he's a painter, and he wants to paint leaves, but then that breeds out and turns into this reality where he's starting to paint trees. But he finds that he can never paint the trees, and he always wants to, and he can paint these beautiful leaves, but he can never paint the trees. Well, fast forward on into his life, he's dying, and someone's coming to take him home. But he's talking in these allegorical ways about a heaven, and so, but he's sorrowful because he's telling this person who's taking him to the afterlife that he hasn't accomplished all that he wanted to accomplish, that he always wanted to go do this other thing, and he was never good at doing this tree painting. He could only just do the leaves, but he was never accomplished. He had so much more he wanted to do, so much more meaningful things. Well, when he got into this afterlife, to heaven in this story, he gets there and he realizes that this tree that he'd been wanting to paint his whole life was there in heaven. And right there, one of the things Tolkien is saying is that this work, this artistry, this task, this vocation that we're all doing, this set apart calling that God has for us, God is putting together the pieces you can't see and I can't see. And he's already working them in this world that he knows is going on, into the renewed creation, into the renewed world. And we are going to see, once we get to heaven one day, the fullness of everything that we set our hand to, if we will be faithful, if we will bring that shalom, if we will be the people who are bringing that into our world and seeing every task of every day as an occasion to meet with God. So guys, let's talk about that this week. Ask questions of one another. Figure out what each other does. Celebrate even the most menial task among you. Celebrate each of your callings and your jobs and your vocations. And let's talk about those things and how we can hold one another accountable, but also encourage one another towards that existence, an existence that brings that vocational holiness into our world and actually speaks a better word, the gospel word, into our world by what we do and how we live in the most mundane times and places. That's revolutionary, and that's redemption at work, and that is a holy formed type of life. I'll see you next week.